Part of today's session is navigating the doctoral journey, lessons learned as a mentor. As mentioned, today's session is part of the Faculty Leading the Change series from OTLE. Our presenter today is Dr. Nicole Dhanraj. She is a Walden contributing faculty member and has a lot of information to share with us. So at this point, I am going to turn things over to Dr. Dhanraj. Welcome.
All right. Good morning. Good morning. It is such a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to see such a small group. We can hopefully have some intimate conversations. And I'm excited to share about my experiences. More so, we go through this process of mentoring by way of our experience. And sometimes, we're faced with situations and we're learning on the go, and just as a means to have a bit of a roundtable, sharing my own journey, and then, of course, learning lessons that potentially could be applicable for you either now or in the future. Now, as we get started here, a bit of who I am. As she mentioned, I have been with Walden for, I think, going on maybe now 4 years plus, serving as a dissertation chair committee, previously in the URR, to review at least when they're coming to finally for that overall quality. I also mentor and coach doctoral students as a side business. And I do a lot of coaching overall, specifically for the military community coming in, transitioning from military to civilian world. I'm considered the civilian guru. I was once in the Army many moons ago. That's where I got my start into healthcare. But, throughout my journey, the last 20 plus years in corporate America, having multiple opportunities to train, mentor, and coach. And of course, learning the differences between the three of them. And I think, as we get started for you all to put in the chat to let me know what your journey has been to mentoring. I think when I look back on mine, it started at the young age, I think of 13 or so, when I was asked to provide tutoring for some young kids based on, I was pretty much an academic back then, and somebody asked to do so. But then from there, recognizing, well, it's not just about teaching somebody to do something, but inspiring, motivating them, getting them to take action. So navigating those things from a young age. Now, fast forward many years, I jumped into the military, had no clue what the military was about. But within about a year or so, being thrust into a leadership position. Fortunately, I was sent to school for 4 weeks to say, this is how we do it, and giving some training tools and trying to apply that as best as I could. Now, of course, over the years, recognizing, there are people under my leadership, people that are coming to me for expertise. And then, of course, looking at it as a business, how do I make sure that I am mentoring appropriately, that I'm at least providing a good experience, and then also looking at my own areas of improvement and growing over time. I would say overall, it has been a very enjoyable journey. There's been several learning lessons to refine the mentor and coach that I am, and making sure that at least I continue to put tools in my tool belt. So when faced with situations, I'm able to navigate it appropriately, as opposed to maybe earlier on in my mentorship or journey, looking back and feeling, oh gosh, you know what, I could have handled that better. Maybe my response could have been different. My timing could have been different. So really being intentional about the effort to enhance my mentoring, both for myself and of course the mentee who's along this journey with me. So as you get situated there, if you want to just share in the chat just a little snippet of your journey, so then, as we go along, we can bring that into the conversation as well. Next. So when I look at the significance of why I decided to submit this to share with you, again, is that I find a lot of time we're learning through experience. And I certainly, and when I say experience, by doing, and I certainly enjoy sitting with faculty members and hearing their stories, hearing those challenges, and how they've navigated through it, and then what has led them to success. Now, I was intentional about getting involved in groups like that. I belong to a lot of different social media groups. I'm always looking at, what are the classes coming up that I can take? So again, enhancing the knowledge, being very intentional about that. But also, in addition to mentoring students, I mentor faculty I work with the University of Maryland as well, and I help support new faculty coming in. So again, making sure that I have as much tools in my tool belt to make sure that they can go out there and be successful, not necessarily in a mentor-mentor relationship, but even as faculty, because that's one of the hats that we wear. So my goal is really to come by way of best practices that has worked for me, learning lessons, and to be able to share that to continue to add to your tools and your tool belt, and for us also to collaborate together and share within our small group what has been the one thing that has worked well for you, or even, you know, your aha moments that has led to a significant learning lesson. Next. So when we look at, you know, our role of mentoring, I think one of the biggest ahas for me was that we all have difference of opinions of what a mentor should be. Some of us are very direct. Some of us, you know, it's a very hands-off approach. Some of us, you know, we kind of look at the mentee in different lights, you know. So are we there to facilitate and handhold? Are we there for them to figure it out on their own and they come to us when we need help? So, but when I look at it specifically for me, I think one of my main roles is to provide that guidance and support. Being able to provide that direction as needed, emotional support, not just academic support, but being the cheerleader, the one that's rah, 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 let's go, let's do this, being able to outstretch my hand and pick them up when they're at their darkest. Now, granted, even that, navigating those emotions was a learning lesson for me, because I am not necessarily an emotional person by my dominant style. You know, I get into a rut, I figure my way out, and I keep moving. I could wallow for a bit, but, you know, especially when somebody is significantly down, you know, to continue motivating them and growing them and inspiring them and at their heels of, you can do this. That was something that I needed to learn, of making sure that I balance according to my mentee style, recognizing what my dominant style is and making sure that I provide the right balance of emotional and academic support. The other thing too is, before you can even come into a relationship, really understanding that there needs to be a level of trust in order for somebody to be open for your guidance. I learned these huge lessons, especially as I traveled, providing training in different areas, and recognizing that with some cultures, it's all about building trust before you can actually get them to take action. Western culture, and I'm from the Caribbean, but, you know, predominantly I've been in the US about 25 plus years. So my style is very Western, very task-oriented. This is the goal. This is how we're going to execute. But recognizing for some mentees, based on their background, we need to develop that rapport first. They, you know, and recognizing that that may go through the entire journey together. So for example, I learned this significantly when I lived and worked in Guam and when I was providing training in Africa. We were there for 2 weeks in Africa specifically. This was grant funded. They're coming to give them, you know, best practices. But pretty much out of 14 days, 10 out of those 14 days, it was getting to know you. No matter that we came from the US as subject matter experts, you know, the best of the best to provide this training, it's like, no, we need to like and trust you before I can believe you. And that's one of the key things that, of course, I look at with my mentees, is really understanding, okay, is it relationship-based or is it task-based, and being able to adjust my style. So now specifically with relationship-based and building that trust in a longer time frame, it is being intentional with the language. How's it going? How's the weekend? How's the family? And really building the relationship, like, and granted, with my experience from Guam and Africa, you are in a meeting for an hour long. At least 30 minutes is about having these light, casual conversations before we can get into what is the task at hand. Now, talk about a huge mindset shift for me. But now that has served me well, because even in my communication with emails, it is, you know, I'm very intentional, again, once I understand my mentee's background and who they are, you know, of, am I very direct and to the point, or am I giving the fluff of the email first, meaning of, hey, how's it going? How was your weekend? What did you get through? Well done. And really having that language before we go into what is the task at hand. And you kind of noticed that with this webinar today, and especially not seeing you, just making assumptions. Okay, we're here for an hour. We want to make sure that we get the best of this hour. So not necessarily spending a lot of time with the niceties, but again, with understanding the mentees and the people behind the scenes here, that really recognizing what I need to do to build that rapport. The other thing too is with building that trust is giving them some insights into who are you and why should I trust you? Not because the university paired me with you means that you're the right person for me. So spending time, and if we had more time here, I would spend more time telling you a little bit about my background so that you could believe me as we go through this webinar. So you are coming with this level of, oh, let me check out this webinar. Let me look at what the information is. This sounds interesting, but who is Nicole so that I can trust and believe or even implement anything that she says? So similarly, we do, or our mentees do that with us. So not because the university comes and says, yeah, Nicole is your chair or your URR, being intentional about sharing your background, your philosophies, especially about teaching, providing that feedback, that's an element of building that rapport. Next. And of course, as we're going along, I'm paying attention to the chat there. So if you have any additional comments that you would like to put to add to the conversation, please do so. Now, we've all heard the mentoring journey is fantastic. It's fulfilling, not only for the mentee, but for the mentor as well. Everybody always recommends at some point in your career, please consider mentoring, whether it's a paid gig or, for social impact. But despite all of the rewards, it is quite challenging. Depending on how many mentees you have, it's about time management. Some of them may take more time than others. It's about encouraging independence versus hand-holding. That was quite the balance that I had to learn at the beginning. Because when I think of my own journey, there are times where I just want somebody to hold my hand and tell me what to do, make it clear because I cannot see the trees through the fog. But then there are other times when I have to figure it out for my own, then it's like, aha, now I get it. So again, recognizing what the needs are of your mentee to be able to determine when do you empower and when do you handhold them. Now, all of that would come with laying expectations, and we'll talk about that in a second. The other thing that can be encouraging is maintaining that motivation. Now, again, like I said, I feel like I'm relatively resilient. I'm very self-motivated. And when I get knocked down, I understand how to pull myself up. I recognize, okay, how much emotion I'm going to give into it. Yeah, I've been wallowing for a day, an hour. Now it's time for logical brain to kick in. So I had to learn over the years too of the importance of even a check-in conversation. You got this. We're almost there. 2 more weeks till the term is ended, to maintain that motivation. So providing the guidance, providing the how-to, the knowledge, but also being the cheerleader, the rah, 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 let's go cheerleader, but also the one that can have that soft, empathetic tone to guide them and just be soothing, because sometimes that's all is needed to help them move forward. So in maintaining motivation as well, my bachelor's degree is in psychology, but really learning more about the variety of ways to motivate, influence, persuade somebody in order to get them to take action, because it certainly isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And then the other thing too is, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, having differing expectations. Each person has their own interpretation of what this relationship is, what the outcomes is, what is my responsibilities, what's their own responsibilities. So really coming to not necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach, but recognizing that, okay, having in-depth conversation to to truly determine, well, how are you expecting this relationship to unfold? What are your goals out of it? What are my roles and responsibility? And then, of course, how do we maintain accountability? Next. The other thing too, in line with those motivations, you have the student struggles. And I think I've recognized on my, throughout my journey with this, is that my heart is softer than I realize, and I want to save a person, I want to save the world one person at a time. So when people are struggling financially, emotionally, personally, professionally, it really impacts me, and recognizing that not everybody I can help, right, for a variety of reasons, but also maintaining emotional boundaries as well. So you're not getting too invested and wrapped into a situation that, it could be difficult to get out of. I had the experience once where I had a student, she was, this was when I was doing in hybrid type of classes, and she was coming to work quite drunk. Coming to class quite drunk. And anyways, I was very concerned one day, and again, making the assumption first based on the behavior. And I was very concerned about her leaving class. This was on base. How does she, get home safely? And, trying to determine, okay, do I take her home? Who do I call? How do I avoid her getting into trouble? Because it sounded like she had some familial problems. And wow, that was, just even in that specific decision, thinking about all sorts of stuff. What does this mean for my future involvement? Who do I call at that moment? So just being able to navigate student struggles depending on what they're facing. Had also people talk about potentially, getting money, how can you help them with navigating their personal lives? And of course, that's recognizing too, what are the services that the university can help that you can tap into without somebody feeling like, this is not my problem, and passing them off to somebody. Committee challenges has been a huge one, recognizing, everybody has different expectations of quality, what a good, robust problem statement looks like, the research questions, and being able to navigate sometimes those crucial conversations when there's a lot of back and forth feedback, not necessarily seeing progress, and being able to say, okay, time out. We've done several iterations of this, kind of keep going back and forth, redoing, undoing. So let's have a solid understanding even before we go forward on what is the expectation, and learning about the other committee member. And again, really just communicating and understanding expectations. And coupled with all of that, personal dynamics. You know who the people are of your tribe. For you, you have an understanding of, or maybe an expectation of what is ideal communication, what it means to be accountable. We have our own biases with that. And yes, there are professional guidelines, but at the end of the day, sometimes I feel like, good communication is very subjective. What I think is good communication, or what I think is good mentorship, could be horrible to you, or could be on a different level to you. So we have those personal dynamics to figure out. And again, really, it's about having underlying communication of what does success look like, so that we can interact with each other. Sometimes you have those personalities that may seem too aloof, too abrasive, but again, because they are not necessarily part of your tribe, the values, the behaviors that you share, those can be potentially challenging situations. Next. So the lessons learned as a mentor, let's jump into this based on those challenges, and of course, navigating, I would say, probably the last 20 years of mentoring and coaching, not only doctoral students, but professionals, military. I'm very involved in engaging with young teenage women, and of course, just trying to help people to amplify their career, and their career as well as in the business space. Next. So the first thing that we look at with lessons, I think the key aspect of being a mentor is identifying success. What does success look like to the mentee and for you as the mentor? So being able to articulate that with them. Well, success looks like to me, Nicole, we're checking in once a week. We're having an email follow-up with notes about, our conversation, that we are progressing based on the timeline, the goals that I set, and then I'm graduating or submitting this to final approval within the next 18 months to 24 months. So being very specific on what are our goals and identifying, again, what are the tactics to have those goals met, as well as a successful relationship. Asking as well as what are the barriers to accomplishing these goals? What is your time like? What are some of your responsibilities outside of work? Any upcoming time off? And how are we going to break through those barriers? Because I can be right behind you on your heels, and because maybe there are, constraints with work, constraints with your family, you may not be able to push through realistically. We come all excited to start this journey, but we want to make sure that your goals are realistic, that the expectations of each other are realistic as well, and recognizing too, what are the barriers that could impact our progress, could impact our communication. So let's identify those so we can mitigate that early enough. And then also, as part of the barriers to, sometimes, students may have changed their committee or assigned a new chair, or probably changing universities. So we want to understand the baggage, the leadership baggage, the mentorship baggage, because with knowing that, I don't necessarily want to guarantee anything, but we can learn from your previous experience and see how we're going to navigate that together. Because sometimes they feel, oh, this was a personal problem, when maybe it was a policy or procedure. So this is how it's going to be. It's the writing is an iterative process. You're going to have many times that you'll have to rewrite. It continues to be refined for a quality proposal. So making sure that they're not feeling like they're slighted or anything. This is the framework that we're going through. But using their past experience, the key thing is not pointing blame, not talking bad about the previous school or the mentor, and not even talking bad about the committee members. If we share differences in opinion, no, just making sure that understanding from their perspective and just learning and moving forward from there. The other aspect is cultural competence. I thought I was a pretty good guru in with my cultural intelligence, but our school is so diverse. We have students not only of different backgrounds within the US, but international students as well. So that is a key thing for us to get to know those students, because their cultural background could impact the personal dynamics of the relationship as well. Next, when we look at the cultural iceberg, next, go ahead. We have, from authority, from responsibility, from individualistic duties, collectivistic duties, how we communicate, lack of communication, what that means, vague communication, all of those things we have to navigate without being frustrated. So for example, in collectivistic societies, which is typically the Eastern societies, we are working on this together. You're holding me side by side. My success is your success, versus individualistic societies like us here in Western culture is we're task driven. So I'm going to be via goals, expectations. This is me working on it independently. So you have to recognize too, okay, what are their expectations from a cultural background as well? Because some of these things don't necessarily come up in conversation. It's by way of behaviors. We have sometimes where it's just waiting on direction. So I also teach with a university in Saudi, and my Saudi students, even though they're still local but international, so different from their approach of how they address me, waiting for my direction, guidance. It's like I am specifically the leader here, they're following, and there is a level of, like, there's a hierarchy of power, versus in Western societies, it's like we're very informal. Communication is via text at any time, emails, very informal. So again, recognizing your students' background and being able to navigate them successfully in the doctoral journey. Next. So as we go along here, we touched on the committee, understanding their expectations, the same thing with our students, but even from a cultural background as well. What is the committee looking for in terms of communication, in terms of work being presented to them? Because in my experiences, I may have reached out to a committee member and asked a question, hoping that we can avoid a revision. But some of them may say, nope, we're following the process. Get your student to finalize and then submit, and then I'll provide my feedback. So just being able to, again, touch base and understand their expectations and their processes. You know, for the most part, we have a framework to follow, depending on the university or specifically to Walden. But at times, that has some blurred lines in terms of, you know, what people's expectations are. One of the key ways to maintain motivation for me, and tell me if you use this, is batching text and emails. My Sunday evening, I'm batching my texts, especially my motivational messages. Great job. Have you written today? Have you taken a quick break today? And batch those all on Sunday and schedule them for the next few weeks. This way, life doesn't get into the way and I forget. So I'm in that zone. Maybe I'm looking at a couple quotes. Maybe I'm just, you know, sending a high five or, you know, have a great day. And that goes a long way just for somebody checking in with you to say, hope you're having a good day. Let's touch base soon. Let me know if you need to chat. Let me know if you need anything. That in itself is, you know, I feel like 60% of building that relationship. But that's my trick. I'm going to schedule them all. I even do this for my kids. Schedule them all. So again, life doesn't consume me and I don't forget. One can argue, well, why can't you schedule this on the day that you want to do it? But I feel like when I batch them, I'm already in that zone. I don't need to switch gears in my head, but I'm dedicating that time and effort for the smaller task. And then I can leave the rest of the week, you know, especially if things come up and they sidetrack me. One thing for me I've learned over the years is not to be embarrassed for help, no matter if I feel I'm experienced or I don't want to, I guess I don't want to flounder with a student or guide them incorrectly and learn from that, you know, just being able to be vulnerable and say, I'm struggling, I'm unsure what to do with this student without the fear of feeling like I'm going to be judged or look incompetent. No, at the end of the day, this is not about me. It's about the relationship. It's about the student's success. So I learned that, I think maybe about a good 15 years ago, just to be open and of course, increasing the vulnerability depending on the audience as well to say, listen, I don't know, I need help, I'm struggling, or maybe I'm just drowning, you know, my work. I want to make sure that I'm keeping up with my mentee. Can you help me with how do you do it? How do you make sure that you're motivating them appropriately, that you're spending enough time, that you're ensuring that you are providing that robust feedback without doing, you know, or going overboard, all of these things that I'm reaching out for your advice so that I can enhance not only myself, but the relationship between me and the mentee. Next. The cadence, that was a big learning lesson for me because I thought, yeah, this is easy. You know, we check in as needed, but then recognizing that, hey, let's have a regular cadence as opposed to letting them drive how many times they want to check in with me. Because oftentimes, again, life becomes like a mechanical bull. Here, there, and everywhere with the student, their life, their writing, their professional work. So making sure that I take the lead on that and saying, okay, we're going to put 15 minutes on the calendar every week, every 2 weeks, or 30 minutes as a touch point. So that way we set accountability, we clear the calendar for it, and we're committed to it. So if we check in, all is well, then it's a quick meeting. But then at least there's the opportunity there to deep dive without having to, you know, it's 3 weeks and then they're struggling and then we're trying to catch up from the last 3 weeks. So a little goes a long way has been the philosophy. Let's establish that cadence early. This was another big lesson for me. Adapt the mentoring style. And I had to recognize that what my dominant style is. So the dominant style was being very facilitating and supportive. I think over the years, I've learned to be a little bit more directive when I'm not necessarily seeing action, but I to be a little bit more laissez-faire in some cases, where not necessarily in a bad way, but sit back, observe, let it unfold, and see what they learn from the situation. And again, this is, things that you have to adapt based on the circumstance, based on your mentee. So, and again, what is the definition of success? So in some cases, you may need to be more hands-off. In some cases, we need to be more direct and task-driven. But again, establishing that expectation from the beginning. Listen, I am here to guide you. I specifically enjoy facilitating by asking critical questions for you to think about it, for you to actually uncover the information without me telling you. I will continue doing so until there is a point where we've tried a number of different ways. And it doesn't seem like you're coming down the funnel. So then I may be more directive in, the task of telling you what to do or how to do. So that is my style. So being able to share your style with them gives them an understanding, okay, I can deal with it. Or Nicole, I am not touchy-feely. I just want you to get straight to the point, and being able, again, to craft the experience specifically to them. Let me pause for a sec. So Sylvia says, good communication is very different from talking. 100%, Sylvia. Communication should do three things: provide new knowledge, affirm current knowledge, and dispel or filter information that are not relevant. Exactly. And then even when we're communicating, what is the objective of the communication? Is it, I am here to listen with the intent of providing a solution? Am I listening to understand? Am I listening to dispel knowledge? So yeah, really establishing the objective of the communication. At the beginning, and that goes to the other point too, now at the beginning of every conversation, I start off, which listening hat am I wearing? Because if somebody's calling to vent, this is what is happening, I am just, I've had it, I'm looking to quit. Am I listening to vent, or for you to vent, or am I listening to provide solutions? Because those are two different listening ears. And then also my response. If you're listening for somebody who's venting, I may need to interject with validation. I understand. I acknowledge how you're feeling. Versus with listening for solution, it's a coupling of that. I understand what you're experiencing. I can tell you this is my experience, or I can tell you what this is other people have done, and move into a solution. But sometimes, the conversation, what is the objective of the conversation? Because that is going to completely change the trajectory of it. So I agree 100%, Sylvia, that really good conversation or communication is completely different from talking. Right now, I am talking rather than communicating, because it's pretty much a one-way street until you put something in the chat here. So you are listening to digest information and see how you could apply it. If you're listening to give me feedback, hopefully at the end when you provide that survey, you're also, maybe 10% of your brain is thinking, aha, you know what, Nicole should be doing this the next time. So when we are focused on what the objective is, we can tune the majority of our attention to that objective. Next. The other thing too is not assuming that students are going to have a plan of action, and me accumulating my resources that I can share with them, whether it's time management, note-taking, a Gantt chart, just having this arsenal of tools that I can share. And this is another one. I reach out to faculty like yourself. Hey, what is it that you suggest? Trello, Asana, Todoist, Google Tasks, Notion, all of these things that I have adapted to share with my mentees to keep on track, and also to celebrate as well, because it's, as we check off that 15-minute yay of writing that we did. We want to be able to celebrate those. And then that also helps us to keep them on track, reiterating the plan. Nicole, remember, we were intending to submit the first draft by May 15th. It's now May 20th. I want to make sure that we're keeping on track. So that way, recognizing the ball is in your court, your role and responsibility, I am fulfilling mine. And, as I was engaging with my colleagues, recognizing that some of us, I would use the word hazing for lack of a better word, but it's more of a hazing process where students have to figure out everything from themselves. And I am here just to provide feedback and guide you through the process. That didn't resonate well with me. How many times grandma died, how many excuses you get. At the end of the day, that's not for me to judge. Again, this is my philosophy. Everybody would have a specific way of guiding and mentoring. But for me, I emphasize, in the real world, you are going to be accountable, make sure that you stay tight to your deadlines. This could cost a project, etc. This is potentially costing you finances. So we want to stay accountable to our times and our goals. Things are going to come up. Please be open, share with me, transparent, honesty. Don't feel like you have to make up an excuse. I understand. Life can get pretty rough with us, but share with me as much as you can what I can assist you with. Be transparent, but we don't necessarily need to make up excuses or sending me pictures, the car, I was in an accident, I'm in the hospital. I'm not here to judge or have any type of, negative thoughts about you. I am here to guide you. Next. Question.
Yes, there's a question in the chat.
Okay, what advice do you have for somebody who has experience teaching graduate and undergraduate, but is teaching doctoral students for the first time? Yeah, number one, attending classes like this. And I'll share some, final lessons at the end, but two, finding a mentor as well. Pair with any one of us so that as you're going along, hey, Nicole, this is my first time. What are the top 3 things that I should do? Okay, you should make sure that you understand your student. You understand expectations of each other. Do you know how to provide feedback? Do you know what a good, robust research question looks like in the framework of the university? What is your timeline going to be? So exactly from these lessons, just creating your own framework using my lessons, best practices. Walden has a few, I think, roundtable discussions. There are lots of free resources and pulling those things together to provide your own framework of best practices. So thus far, I want to get to know the student. So let's have some conversation. Tell me about your experiences with your academic journey, your own mentor. How do you view success? What do you think are the expectations from me? What is your role and responsibility? So your first conversation, and I think I have this as a point here, the first conversation is pretty much a discovery call. Hi, I'm Gunjan. I am your mentor, and I'm so excited to help support you on this journey. But as we get started, I would like to learn a little bit more about you. The university automatically peers us based on, your area of study. But let's get to know each other first. So you spend, maybe it could be one session, a couple of sessions. You ask a few questions so that you can get to know them. And then as you wrap up that conversation, you share, well, these are my philosophies, and this is how I foresee that we're going to go through this journey. We're going to set up a cadence, 15 minutes every week so that we touch base, making sure that, I'm keeping you accountable, you're on your timeline, if there's any help that you need specifically. And then I'd also like to make sure that you stay on your timeline. But as we talk about the timeline, let's understand your barriers. How is your work situation? Do you have a very chaotic job, or are you going to be able to navigate this pretty okay? Okay, so if you have a chaotic job, is your timeline of your first draft within 2 weeks reasonable, or do we need to adjust that? Because there's one thing from the paperwork that you get, but having those conversations and exploring, and what I like to call provocative curiosity, provocative questions where you're provoking curiosity, so that way you're digging deeper to make sure that they're setting up themselves for success, and you know what your plan for success is. Which hat do I need to wear? Is this a very task-driven relationship? Do I need to check in? Do I need to batch my texts and say, how you doing? How's life? Do I need to be more facilitating? Is this person going to be okay independently? So all of those things, it takes time to discover with your mentee. So there is definitely where I would start. The other thing, Gunjan, is being organized. Your files, first draft, second draft, third draft, final, having a nomenclature of how you want those to be described for you to be, for the student to name it when they send you. So that way it's easy for you to find files, or what is going where, having it in the subject line, first draft, second draft, proposal. All of those things are crucial, especially when it's time to search for something, and then everything gets lost in the weeds at times. Clean copy versus, all markup, that can be a whole chaotic mess there too. So having that streamlined. We're going to keep all the comments until maybe 2 weeks before your final draft. So that way, when I reread it, it flows well, everything goes good. But for now, until you have these multiple iterations, we want to see the progress. And let me tell you, your eyes got to get accustomed to that. However works for you, I think after you have a couple students underneath your belt, you will determine what works and what doesn't work. But caution, you may think something works and then for another student, it's just, topsy-turvy, a mess. So the key here is being adaptable and having multiple options for your students. But what I like to do is let me be the one to adapt more than the student, because they're already overwhelmed. There's so much to do. Some of them are not technological savvy. So I don't want to put added pressure. I try to simplify it based on what I know of them. But ideally, my current method is keep all the comments until we get to that almost clean copy. Speaking of copies, let's have a backup copy. I try to back up my files at least once a month. Sometimes it goes to once a quarter. But in the last maybe 6 weeks, I've had to change my computer 3 times because of freak accidents. Or I got a computer from Amazon, it wasn't working, supposed to be a new computer, only to recognize it was a secondhand computer. So all of these things, could happen that could prevent potentially you having access to your files. Of course, if you're into the cloud, no big deal. But if you're not a cloud person, making sure you have multiple backups and there's a frequent backup cadence too. Next. And if anybody else wants to help support Gunjan's question too, what is the key things in getting started? Let's go to the next slide.
And Gunjan also has another question, a great question actually. How would teaching doctoral students differ from teaching graduate students who are working adults?
Yeah, fantastic question there. So there are a couple of different things. So when you teach doctoral students, I'm assuming that you're talking about the pre-classes before they actually are writing the dissertation, yeah? So teaching and then offering opportunity to apply. I find a lot of students, they don't necessarily have, a full understanding of what their study is. So they haven't applied the knowledge that you have taught them. So for example, I'm teaching you how to drive, but until you actually go sit in a car, you can pass the driving test just with didactic knowledge, but go actually, exhibit or apply that knowledge. You may not even know how to do a 3-point turn. So giving them the opportunity to apply knowledge is critical. For somebody who does not have their study well thought of yet, or they're just kind of going through the motion, I think it's very crucial for us as doctoral teachers to make sure that they are able to apply the knowledge, because oftentimes I find students come to me and it's like they've never gone through the classes because they've just been, not necessarily intentional with their study. They're just kind of going through the motions to apply the class. So that's teaching doctoral students really to apply. But even with graduate students, that's the intent, right? We want them application of knowledge. That's why we're giving them, case studies. We're having these discussions. We're talking about conflict resolution. How are you going to apply? How are you going to apply the principles of crucial conversation if you had X, Y, and Z scenario? But the key thing there, Gunjan, and that can be another 2-hour workshop just on your question, is there are doctoral students teaching in the courses, and then there's mentoring through the dissertation process, that the second phase of the doctoral journey, or let's say the final phase of it. So you're really do you remember what it was when you were talking about when they were teaching you about maybe the meal plan of how you analyze your literature, or how do you craft your purpose or your problem statement? So we're going to apply that, and really in the doctoral journey, it's facilitating key questions, giving examples, okay, or helping them to go deep. So for example, I have several students right now, they're at the top of the funnel. They're talking about teachers' perceptions with students with disabilities in inclusive classrooms. Well, it's very high level in effective professional development, all sorts of students with disabilities. What is an inclusive classroom? So now I ask them, go look at the literature, draw me a funnel, tell me all of the high level information, but come down into the funnel and let's really identify the problem. What is the deficiency in professional development? Is it from an organizational standpoint? Is it resources? Is it lack of application? Is it the instructor? Is it the content? So that is how we're facilitating the dissertation phase. The teaching phase is a little bit different. I am, just as Sylvia mentioned, I am giving you this knowledge, telling you how to craft a problem statement. How do you come up with a research question? How do you go and look at the literature critically? We're giving them all of that knowledge, and then we're saying, you go do it. You present your assignments, things like that. But now, really in the doctoral phase, we're applying that knowledge, but helping them to go multiple layers deep, because just like driving, you can go drive for the first time and pass your exam, but you can continue refining that to make sure that you're not, taking shortcuts, you're not driving with poor quality, you're being intentional. So I hope that that helps. All right, so with that said too, Gunjan, going back to your first question, is one key thing too is to establish a charter of responsibilities and making it very formal. So that way, again, there is no ifs, ands, or anything that is vague. How are we going to resolve conflict? What does turnaround time look like? What does communication look like? Are you texting me at midnight? What happens if you just couldn't do it? You go MIA. The term is coming to an end. This is the first time I've heard from you in 48 hours. What is the turnaround time? So establish all of that at the beginning. And that way we're holding each other accountable too. And as we talked about too, we talked about the support levels, the mentoring, establishing that in your charter. This is a level of support. You also have a responsibility to go out there, do your research, maintain your timelines, continue with the reiteration of improvement. So I am going to guide you. Some cases I would hold your hand, I would make the decision, but you also tell me when I am just dead. I don't know, I can't see the trees through the fog. Nicole, help me break this down, and I can be more directive there. Next. So this was another big learning lesson for me too. I may not have been the right mentor for them. We didn't jive well, personalities, my style, communication, and everybody, again, it's a learning process. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. At the end of the day, we want this to be a very good learning experience. I'm going to try, definitely, make sure that I'm doing everything that I can to make sure that I adapt and I learn from that person. But it could be that, hey, I gotta go, somebody needs to replace me. It's just not working out. Celebration. I am the one that typically, I don't celebrate the small milestones for me personally. So again, recognizing the key in celebrations, especially in this daunting journey. Sylvia asked, what has been my experience when there are obvious signs of conflict among students and committee? Yeah, so I have multiple levels of addressing that. First, I talk with the committee, maybe, having a conversation of, okay, this is clearly, we're having some conflict here, differences in opinion, very strong differences in opinion. Is there a compromise? If there is not a compromise, and I've actually had this, I'll give you two situations where we've gone back and forth, me telling the student, really your committee just wants you to have a very robust study. This is going to help you. So by the time we get to URR, your study is pretty robust. So allow several iterations. But by the 5th or 6th or 7th iteration is like, okay, timeout. And especially looking at the feedback, because the feedback went from do this to no, why did you do that? Go back and do this. So now we've had evidence of a pattern. So now I can come to the committee member and say, okay, listen, this is what's been happening. We're really trying to follow your guidance, but there's also some conflicting information from you. So could you make sure that you provide a clear direction? And then can we come to a compromise, because it's now been the 5th iteration to move this forward. Perhaps, even though you still see some areas of opportunity, perhaps as the student continues or they get to URR, we can also address that. In some cases, having to bring somebody else to mediate because the person didn't want to move forward, very adamant of, no, it needs to be this way. So me presenting my case as well, here are all the things that we were requested to do, undo, do it again. And it just feels like it's going round and round in circles without any major progress. This is, again, my interpretation. This is how I've tried to address it with the committee, and we're just not having any movement. Could you intervene? So then we come together and we talk about it, and then there's a resolution from a higher level than us. But ideally, starting with the committee member to get a solid understanding, and even helping the student navigate. And again, making sure that we're not pushing people like, yeah, that person is just so needy, or they're so demanding and they're making it hard, making sure that there's no negative talk in it. But the first thing I would do, Sylvia, is really addressing it with the committee member to understand their point of view, and then being able to share that with the student, adjust, and if there's any further issues, taking it up the chain. Next slide. And as I talked about before, based on your conversation, the type of student, the cultural background, their previous experiences, you would have to really balance autonomy versus empowering them. Take a step back, but knowing when to step in. And that is really about being in tune with your student from their communication. If they're ghosting you, what does that mean? And that's where, again, those text messages come in to make sure that they're staying on top of it. But being mindful that some students may not necessarily reach out their hand and say, I have not done anything, I'm floundering, I have no idea. So you having to really pull that out of them if you're not seeing progress. Next. And as we come to the end here, any final questions that you can put in the chat so we could address that as we go along. And with everything, clarity, just as I told Sylvia, from the committee members, clarity from my expectations, what I expect of you, what you expect of me, communication, and having a mutual agreement via your charter. And now, especially with ChatGPT, you can get ChatGPT to help you create a template for your charter if you'd like. This is what I'd like out the expectation of my student. This is the experience that I want to provide them. Create a charter that both of us could work with. And again, spending time with your student to make sure that this is crystal clear. The path is crystal clear. The journey, I am setting you up for success. And these are the things that I found helpful. And continuity, momentum is key, because whether it's inspiration, motivation, being proactive before somebody starts spiraling, catching them and making sure that you are able to keep them moving a little at a time, because it's those little efforts really add up to a lot. And a finished dissertation. Next. The other thing just is we were just talking about maintaining, managing complaints. That would be the direction that I would go if it was the committee. If it was with me, let's try to resolve it. Let's try to come to a common understanding. If the person, there's already kind of dismissive, you can see there's no wanting or desire to salvage the relationship. And I've had actually paid clients, coaching clients, is like, you know, okay, you're not seeing what you want to see because really it's your accountability and your lack of progress. But if somebody is unable to hear the truth and have a transparent relationship, then it's okay. We can try to salvage the relationship. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. At the end of the day, this is meant to be a successful experience for you. So start at your level and then take it up the chain if need be. And that's where your documentation, you know, interactions, follow-up summaries of conversations, you know, key aspects. This is what we talked about. This is the outcome. This is some of our challenges, and have some brief bullet points if ever you had to address this formally with a complaint. Mentoring is challenging, so please make time to spend for your own wellness, especially you're motivating, you're providing that therapist hat sometimes. So make sure you're filling your own emotional tank so that you can be fully attentive and support others. And with building relationships comes creating those safe spaces. It takes a while to build trust. And some people, again, because of their background, it may take a long time. So go along with that journey and be open to it. You know, again, you may be able to create trust. I thought I was a pretty open, great person to work with, but recognizing that, again, that is my own perception. Others is going to have a variety of perceptions of me, their experiences potentially impacting the relationship. So allow it time to blossom. All right, everybody, that is it, I believe. I think that's our last slide. I would ask you, as we wrap up here, if you can put in the chat, what has been one aha learning lesson that you can share with others today? And I don't see under any other questions in the chat at the moment. There are a lot of learning lessons, you know, but I think my aha is really setting the tone at the beginning, you know, creating that charter, establishing the responsibilities, how we're going to navigate this journey together, and then being realistic about the challenges along this journey. What are you going to face? You're going to be slammed into a brick wall and probably, you know, that it's going to take a lot to recover. How do we prevent that? So really giving you the reality without scaring you, but letting you know I am here to support, and this is how I'm going to do it. I informed my department that the student needed to hear a different voice as they were not making the changes. Oh yes, Lamar, definitely. Because if I am not seeing that you have actually had this happen too, am I not communicating it well? Am I saying the wrong things? I've tried a variety of ways to say the same thing. And gosh, Nicole, you know what? This is probably the 5th time we're talking about the same thing. I've given a variety of resources. Time out, time to get a different voice. Or, hey, Nicole, could you take a look at this and see if I'm guiding the person appropriately? All right, everybody. Well, thanks for your insights. I appreciate you being here. Your key lessons, setting the tone, you know, establishing that cadence and communication. Let's continue the conversations. Connect with me on LinkedIn, or I'll see you around on another webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Great presentation, and thanks all for attending.